Hey, so about a year ago, I heard a video. Actually, it was audio. Heard it on several different YouTube sites where Mother Teresa Agnes Garlick, she's the head of a Carmelite nuns monastery in Arlington, Texas. She was on audio with her bishop, Bishop Michael Olson, and this bishop asked her, it was like very gentle, like you could tell, like he knew the gravity of the situation and he handled it very well, in my opinion. Said, it's come to our attention that you've been involved with immorality, that you have violated the sixth commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery or fornication. And she said yes. She said yes. She admitted it on audio. And the bishop's response was so loving and so Christ-like. He said, I'm so sorry. Like, he said it in a genuine, like, he really cared about this woman's soul. And he said, so you had sex with a priest from another diocese. And then he asked her his name, and I couldn't hear it. It was muffled. I don't know. I think she said she didn't want to tell his name. And he said, well, it's important because he's also taken a vow and his soul's in jeopardy. So then he said to her, so you had sex with this priest? And he said, yes. And he said, I understand not all of it was in person. Some was on the phone. Is that correct? And the woman said, yes, some was in person, but most was on the phone. So she's on audio admitting that she had sex with a priest, and she also had phone sex with the priest. Both are immoral. Both are a sin, and both, she knows she shouldn't be doing. So then the father the bishop very gently says to her, well, I'll have to relieve you of your duty. You can no longer lead these nuns. I mean, that's like the least she could expect. And then you could hear in her voice, she got all nervous. She says, well, actually, she changes her story. Actually, it was all phone sex, just phone sex. That's all everything was phone sex. And then the bishop gently says to her again, like, this bishop was so calm and Christ-like. I was pretty impressed. He says to her again, we have trouble with the truth, don't we? like you just said the opposite. And she did have trouble with the truth, because after she was relieved, she started making all these false allegations against the bishop. And, other channels follow this more closely. I don't like following all this politics in the church, but you could look this up. But long story short, I just look at the bottom line. She provided no evidence, just like the other excommunicated dude, Vigano. He when he got caught covering for McCarrick and Bishop Neestet, he starts pointing the finger and like, Pope Francis, he did it, like the guy from the Warriors. It was the Warriors did it. That's what weasels, when these rats get caught, they never take responsibility. They always point the finger at somebody else. So this nun started falsely accusing, and every accusation was proven false. She had no evidence. But every single accusation that the bishop had, he had evidence. He actually has her on audio saying, yes, I had sex with a priest. So they fight it tooth and nail for a year. They go up to the Pope, and the Pope sides with the bishop because, again, these people had no evidence. The evidence was that she had sex. It was clear as day. And so, lo and behold, what do I read this morning? I mean, I guess it's old news. I think it was dated from a few days ago. But the Carmelite nuns, this Mother Teresa Agnes, just joined the SSPX. The SSPX welcomes them and talks about how wonderful and how they're going to serve Holy Mother Church. And it just goes figures. I mean, a couple quick points here, and then I got to go to work. But the SSPX always tries to say, we're in communion with the church. This absolutely is a slam dunk proof they're not in communion with the church. This is a slam dunk. So they disobey their bishop. They disobey the Pope. But they're going to be they're going to be all right. And they're going to serve the church with the SSPX. Because the SSPX is not in communion with their bishop or with the Pope. And they're like, oh, well, Pope Francis, gave them faculty so they could marry people and hear confessions. Yes, and in that statement, when he talked about it, he said, I'm giving them this in order to bring them back into communion with the church. That's what he said, because they're not in communion, Pope Benedict said the same thing. I'm giving them, I'm trying to give them, I'm trying to work with them, to bring them back into communion with the church. St. John Paul II clearly said they're in schism. Even Cardinal Burke said they're in schism, and he's considered the top canon lawyer alive today. They're in schism. Walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. It's a duck, brother. And there's some schismatic ducks in SSPX. So that's number one, that it just proves the SSPX is in schism. But number two, it just shows, Peter Crift said, when I was coming over to the Catholic Church, I was reading a lot of Peter Crift. He's very influential, amongst others. And I said something I didn't agree with him at the time, and now I agree. He said, Protestant churches always become liberal. If you protest the one Catholic church, you always become liberal. And I didn't agree with that time, but I'm watching my Protestant brothers and sisters, and there's still some strong conservatives that, hold fast to the, the truth as they see it. But most of them are becoming liberal these days. And you say, well, SSPX isn't Protestant. Well, they're protesting the Catholic Church. That's that's the definition of Protestant, protesting, And they're not in union with the Pope. And you see this with the old Catholics. If you're not familiar with the old Catholics, in the 1800s, there was this leader. He was excommunicated. Joseph Ignaz Dollinger, I believe his name was. And he was protesting the church. He was saying the church was a modernist because they would do the Mass in Latin. And he said, look, at the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, the Mass was always done in the language of the people. So he protested. Church thought at that time, the church was led by the Holy Spirit, that we only say the Mass in Latin universally. But he protested, and they would say the Mass in the vernacular. Isn't that ironic? But that didn't get him excommunicated. They were talking to him. But then when Vatican I happened, he said this was not a, how do you put it? Basically not a valid, he didn't recognize Vatican I. He condemned it, and he said the church needs to condemn Vatican I. He's not going to follow Vatican I. And he refused to accept Vatican I, just like the SSPX refused to accept parts of Vatican II. They're what I call cafeteria Catholics. They pick and choose. You got cafeteria Catholics on the left that, they'll say, oh, I'm Catholic, but I'll vote pro-choice. Or I'm Catholic, but I don't see nothing wrong with same-sex marriage. They're picking and choosing Catholic morality. And then you have Catholics who claim to be conservative, that are believe the church's teachings on same-sex marriage and abortion, but they'll pick and choose which councils, what parts of each council they'll accept, what Mass they think is valid, or or good, And there's no difference. They become liberal. And the proof of this is now the old Catholics who thought the church was modern, and they broke away from the church. And 2 years later, I believe Vatican I took place in 1869 or ended in 1869. And the leader of the old Catholics, Joseph Ignaz Dollinger, was excommunicated 2 years later, 1871. And the old Catholics, for years, they're like, we're the true church. We're the true church. The Roman church, the Pope is in schism. That sound familiar? This is what all schematics say. We're the true church. The real church is in schism. But now, recently, they started ordaining women. Yes. Protestants always become liberal. And now these feminist women, who call them these feminist nuns, who have phone sex, think it's okay to have phone sex and actual sex, according to herself, with priests. Now they're part of the SSPX, and it's all cool. And it's just kind of, to me, it's par for the course, because under Pope Francis, the child sex abuse is almost eliminated. Like, we're getting like 3 a year, where it used to be before Pope Francis or before Vatican II, it was thousands of years, thousands per year. And it's just after Vatican II, it kept going down, and now it's down to, under Pope Francis, it got down to virtually nothing. You know, relatively speaking, the public school systems, the Boy Scouts, and any other group that deals with children, Catholic Church is by far and away the safest place for children today in 2024, except at the SSPX. That's where you keep seeing all these child abuse scandals, especially in France. And you see the bishops over there getting caught covering for their priests, just like their founder, excommunicated Catholic Marcel Lefebvre, covered for Carlos Urigati. He was a pedophile predator priest, and when the other priests came to tell, when he was in seminary, they warned Lefebvre and Williamson. And all Lefebvre said was, I'm very fond of this guy. He said, this is his quote to Bishop Williamson, I'm very fond of this man. Please watch him like a hawk. That was, and Lefebvre ordained Carlos Urigati, who was convicted years later of child sex abuse. So these SSPX guys cover for child abusers. They're very immoral. They act, of course, like the Pharisees are going to act like they're more holier than anybody, and they're going to accuse the vicar of Christ of being unholy, just like the Pharisees accuse Christ of being unholy. So to me, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by these Pharisees, these immoral people that are disobedient to the Pope, disobedient to the church, that they would take a disobedient woman, a feminist, phone sexer, adulterer woman, and put her in charge in their organization. So phone sex, that's the SSPX, is the new thing, I guess. I had something else I wanted to say, but I'm looking at the time. I got to get rolling. But, stay Catholic. Never go against the Pope. If you're unsure, always stick with the church. You see throughout history, people think they're smarter than the church. Martin Luther, Joseph Ignaz, Dullinger, Marcel Lefebvre, Vigano, they all go off and start their own little church. And eventually they all become liberal, and they all fall away from the one true Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church every time. No matter how holy they seem. 1 Samuel, I think it's 1 Samuel, I forget but Samuel, look it up. Samuel says, rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. It's demonic. That rebellious spirit in SSPX is demonic. It's demonic. And, St. Paul tells us, don't be surprised that Satan's followers look like Satan's leaders look like servants of holiness and righteousness. Satan himself comes as an angel of light. So of course his servants are going to come as servants of righteousness. So just remember that. And if you're Catholic, stay Catholic, and never, ever go against the family again.